All right. I said we're in Mark 5 tonight for our teenage class. We're going to get started here in just a minute. I don't know how far we're going to get tonight. We're just going to look probably at the first half of Mark 5 and talk about Jesus and the demon-possessed man. Like I say, this is recorded for those who are going to watch it later. I know some of them can't make it on Monday nights with all that's going on, so hopefully we'll be able to record this from them. So let's get started. We start in verse 1. You remember at the end of chapter 4 of Mark, we just got through talking about Jesus calming the sea, of how he was asleep in the boat when the waves and everything was crashing around him. And the people, the disciples on the boat were marveled at him because they were asking about, or they were amazed because he got up and he said, "Peace, be still," and everything stopped. And we talked about that was John's way of showing that Jesus was the master of nature. Now we're going to see tonight that Jesus is the master of demons, and that he's going to meet a man who is the worst demon-possessed man of anything we see or have recorded in the Bible. And so we're going to try to see that. All right, you got to move over. So we're going to look at this starting in verse 1. It says, "They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one can bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched those chains apart and broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, 'What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me.' For he was saying to him, 'Come out of the man, you unclean spirit.'" So before we go any further, let's go back and look at these verses. So like I said, we see Jesus just finishing calming the sea. He's come to the other side of the sea. He gets out and he comes to a place that from this account and from other accounts was notorious for being the resident of a crazy man, demon-possessed man that we're going to see how he was. What's interesting about this is that Mark and Luke tell us there's one man here. Matthew actually tells us there's a second man with him, but the second man is nothing compared to his demon possession is nothing compared to this one. And so that's why people think that Mark and Luke don't include the second man, because the first man is so outrageous that he explains enough of what Jesus is about to do. I thought it was interesting. I didn't plan this, but usually when I preach on Sundays if I preach a Halloween sermon, this is one topic I typically go to about the scariest man in the Bible, or one of the scariest men in the Bible. And I thought it was funny how it lined up that this is Halloween week and this is what we're talking about. So you notice that Jesus gets to the other side of the sea. He sailed from one side to the other, and he gets out of the boat. And as soon as he gets out of the boat, a man comes to meet him. You notice this is a man called with unclean spirits, also called demon possession. Exactly how this works, we don't know. This is one of the things that you sort of wish we had more information about, but we don't. Apparently, this was something that happened at the time of Christ, around Christ's coming, and around his shortly after he was here to demonstrate his power and his control over Satan. That these demon possessions happened, and these demon possessions would happen to people, and they were beyond just a normal being sick or normal mental illness. This was a very major thing to this, but Jesus was able to control this. And so you notice that Jesus comes out, and you get this man. Verse 2, you get the introduction to this man. This man comes out of the tombs. You got to imagine what it'd be like to live among the tombs. Now, the tombs in their time were caves. He lived in the caves. He lived in caves that were either old burial places or burial places that hadn't been used yet. What they would do for burying, they would have a big cave that would be in the rock, and they would have a shelf carved out on that rock, and they would put the newest body on the closest edge of that little shelf. And so what happens if you had whole families buried in the same tomb in the Bible? And what they would typically do is they would take the dead person and lay them on the nearest edge of the shelf. But to do that, they'd take the people who are behind them and basically push them back. And so you could have a cave that had no telling how many people in it that were buried, and you had the newest body on the front. And again, these bodies were typically bodies that were sealed in a tomb that had rocks that would block the entrance so that no animal would get in there and disturb it. These were family plots. And so this man is in such a mental disarray that he has to live among the tombs. That he lives among in these caves, and again, that's a very interesting thing. If we had somebody here in Fulton who we said lived in a graveyard, we'd be very amazed at that and very freaked out by that, very worried about that. We would probably steer clear of this guy, and that's the idea here. This guy, the first sign is that he lived among the caves. Well, first sign was he's had an unclean spirit. Second, he lived among the tombs. Then you notice the next part, second part of verse 3 and verse 4, is that this man had a unnatural, superhuman strength. He was able to be so strong that he was able to break anything anybody tried to bind him with. And the idea here is that the chains they would use would be the chains they would typically use for prisoners. And these were very strong, very stout chains. They would have to be stout chains for them to be able to hold prisoners. But this man had been bound, he'd been shackled and chained, and he just broke right through it. This gives us a little insight into maybe what they used to do in certain places. The way some people would treat mental illness or people with demon possession is sometimes they would chain them down. They would chain them onto beds or chairs so they wouldn't be able to cause any damage. And that's the idea here. He was probably chained not to be mean to him or cruel, but he was chained to keep him from hurting himself or hurting someone else. And then you notice that he had these chains that were using to tie him down, and he would break them. He would just shatter them. He would have an immense strength. And again, he had a strength that people couldn't subdue him. They tried to hold him down or try to hold him back, and it couldn't stop him. So you had this guy who was demon possessed, who lived among the tombs, had a superhuman type strength. And not only that, you notice this next part, night and day, he lived among the tombs and on the mountains, and he was always crying out. He was always crying. He was always moaning and groaning and yelling. And basically, the whole people were afraid of him. That's what we get from Matthew and Luke, is that the whole area knew about this guy at the graveyard. And we're going to see this guy a little bit later, how he's famous. But everybody knew about him. Everybody knew his reputation. And everybody stayed clear of him. But he always cried out. And then finally noticed he would cut himself with stones. He would take pottery or rocks and just cut himself and do what we call self-mutilation. And so, again, this is a guy that nobody wanted anything to do with. This was a guy that probably made people stay away from this graveyard and away from this place. And so he's at this place where Jesus comes, and Jesus gets off the boat here. And some have wondered if Jesus did this accidentally or if he did it on purpose. Because with this guy being well known for this, you would think that the fishermen would know which shore this was. They would know that this guy was here, and they tried to avoid this shore. But we don't hear anything about them trying to avoid this or trying to go another way, or maybe Jesus told them to go here because he knew what he was about to do. And so what happens next is when this man sees Jesus from afar, he recognizes who he is. And he comes again and falls down on the ground. Again, we've seen this throughout the Gospels. We see it throughout Mark. We'll see it throughout the other Gospels. When there's men or demon-possessed who are confronted with Jesus and Jesus comes to heal them, they always recognize who he is. And this one comes down and it falls down before Jesus and cries out with a loud voice. And he cries out saying, "What do you have to do with me, Jesus, the Son of the Most High God?" Again, this is one of the statements that these demons would make, that Jesus would often rebuke them and tell them to be quiet. in that they would say that they would recognize who he is. And you remember in chapter 3 of Mark, the Pharisees tried to say Jesus cast out demons with demons. But the idea of Jesus was that if the demons were really casting out by demons, he said, what good would that do for Satan? And he said, too, the second idea was, why would they acknowledge him as the Son of God? And so he cries out to him. And notice he begs him, that adjure you. I adjure you is basically I beg, I plead. I make a case before you. It's a legal term. I make a case to you. By God, do not torment me. Don't do this to me. Again, what he was expecting Jesus to do, we don't know. But he says, don't torment me. And you notice in verse 8 tells us what Jesus is doing that has prompted this from happening to this man. Again, he says, for he was saying to him, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. Jesus was trying to cast the demon out. He was trying to heal the man and make him better. And the demon didn't want to come out. And so we get to verse 9, and we pick back up with a reading. It says, and Jesus asked him, what is your name? He replied, my name is Legion, for we are many. And he begged him earnestly not to send him out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, send us to the pigs, let us enter into them. So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. So let's notice what happens. Jesus is speaking to him, and Jesus asks, what's your name? Now, I don't think, and this is sort of what we see, I don't think Jesus is asking because Jesus doesn't know, because Jesus wants to be friends with this man. He's asking for those around him. He's asking for his apostles, his other disciples, to know what he's about to do, to realize this isn't just any demon-possessed man. This isn't the normal demon-possessed man. You notice he says, my name is Legion. And he says, we are many. The idea in the Roman government, the Roman army, a legion was a troop of soldiers, a group, a regiment, attachment, however you want to say it. And a legion was typically 4,000 to 6,000 soldiers. So this is what he's saying. He's saying that there's now whether or not he's being literal or not, he's saying there's many of us. There could be, by the technical term legion, up to 6,000 evil demons, evil spirits in this man. And so this is why he calls his name Legion. He says, well, we are many. And again, the demon begs him. They beg him, don't send us out of the country. Don't send us away. Again, where they're afraid to go, we don't know. Some people think maybe they're afraid to be cast back into Hades, wherever they've been before, or some kind of something that was happening. We don't know. But they beg him not to just send them out, but to send them somewhere. And then you notice verse 11. There's a great herd of pigs feeding on the hillside. So what you see is there's a big herd of pigs on the side of the hill that is eating right near Jesus, and they're there in their farm, and they see the pigs. And those verse 12, they beg him, send us to the pigs, let us enter them. And so what we see is that Jesus they're asking Jesus to let them know. Now one thing before we go too further is to notice where Jesus is at. Jesus is in Galilee, but he's actually in a Gentile area. The reason we know that, and we would assume that, is because this herd of pigs. To the Jews, a pig was an unclean animal. The pig was an animal that you didn't touch, you didn't eat, you didn't farm. It was one of the ones that God had condemned to be unclean. Therefore, they wouldn't eat of it. And so here they're asking one of these pigs, and there's a herd of pigs here. And you'll notice that the last verse, verse 13, Mark tells us there's 2,000 pigs. So this isn't just a couple pigs here. This is a pretty substantial pig farm. So one of two things is happening here. Either, one, this is a Jewish man who is breaking the law and doesn't care about the law, and he's got Jewish men watching his herd, or this is a Gentile. These are Gentile people. And again, some people think this region, and we're going to talk about the region in just a minute, is probably Gentile. These are non-Jews who don't realize who Jesus is, probably haven't heard that much about Jesus. And so they beg to go be sent to the pigs. Now, some people will see this and they will think, well, this is Jesus being cruel because he does this to the animal. No, what Jesus is showing here is he's showing his power over the demons. And two, he's showing that human life is more valuable than animal life. That he would rather cast these demons out of the human and into these pigs than to tell he doesn't tell these demons, oh, well, the pig is just as important as you are. I can't do that. I can't send you out of this man and not into these pigs. But he shows that human life is more valuable, I believe, here. And so he said, they asked him to let us enter those pigs. And he knows verse 13, this shows Jesus' power over the demons, the unclean spirits, the ones who are of Satan, that he has to give them permission. They have to ask Jesus for his permission. This tells us some things about Jesus, is that even the forces of Satan are not able to overpower the forces of God. Even Satan's minions have to ask Jesus for permission to go to another body, to go to another host. And he knows he gave them the permission. He tells them they can go. And so these spirits leave this one man. They enter into this herd of pigs. And again, there's a question about how many were there. Not pigs, but how many demons were there. Were there 2,000? Did each pig have a demon in? Or was it just a few of the pigs that may have went crazy and incited the whole herd to rush? We don't know. But what we do know is that the whole herd of 2,000 pigs rushed down the hill. And the interesting about Mark's the only one that tells us the number of how many pigs there are. The other two Gospels just tells us pigs, a herd of pigs, a big number of pigs. Mark says about 2,000 pigs. About 2,000 pigs rushed down the steep embankment and go into the sea. And they're drowned in the sea. And that sort of leaves us with the idea the demons didn't want to be left out to another country, but yet they enter these pigs and they go into the water and kill themselves. So what was accomplished here? We really don't know. And I really can't give you an answer why the demons asked to go in the pigs and should have been sent out, other than just that was one of their goals, was to die in the host rather than just be sent back as a disembodied spirit. And that's the idea that we see in Luke and Mark or Matthew, is that they didn't want to be disembodied. They didn't want to just be spirits that were sent back for and be in probably the Hadean realm. They wanted to possess something and to be somewhere else. So we saw this all happen. This man is finally cleansed. He's finally free of the demon. We get to verse 14, and we see the reaction of the people there. Notice verse 14, the herdsmen fled and told it to the city and in the country, and people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there clothed in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. Now, before we go any further, let's talk about this. Notice the herdsmen, they see their pigs charge down this huge hill and charge into the ocean to their death, or the Sea of Galilee, and they run to the city. Notice they run to the city and the country. They tell anybody and everybody they can about what they've just seen. Again, the question is this Jewish men or is this Gentile men? If it's Gentile men, and it could be either one, this is very interesting because here they are seeing the power and the ability of Jesus in what he's going to accomplish. If it's Jewish people, they're hearing about Jesus now in this area. And we're going to see later that Jesus is going to come back to this area, and there's going to be a lot of people that follow and come to Jesus. And some people think that there's probably one or two reasons for that. One of those reasons, maybe this right here, we're going to see the second reason in just a minute, that there are people who hear about what Jesus has done. They come to see what had happened. Again, notice they go and tell them what happened. They run back and tell everybody in the city and in the town, the country, to come see what this man has done, probably expecting to see the pigs. And then in verse 15, they came to Jesus, trying to figure out what's going on. And the first thing they see is this demon-possessed man. Now, there's one other thing about Mark that or other thing about Matthew and Luke that Mark doesn't tell us. That we see here in this, it explains one of these phrases, is that they came to the man. When they come to the man who was among the tombs, let me get a minute, it was naked. He was unclothed. He never wore clothes. He never, nobody could keep clothes on him. He would rip them off. That was part of this demon possession that was happening to him. So this is just, again, you add to that idea. Not only to live among tombs, not only tear these things apart, not only cut himself, he cried out all the time, he was also naked. And the people come, and the people knew this man, because again, it'd be about like Fulton. If there was a guy who lived in the graveyard, we'd all be scared of him, want to avoid him. But that doesn't mean we wouldn't know who he is. So we wouldn't pay attention. We wouldn't know what he looked like because we don't want to see him. We want to know about him. And so they come, and when they come to see what happened to these pigs, they come to Jesus to see what's going on. And here's the guy. This guy that they've been afraid for, this guy who has a reputation of scaring off boaters, scaring off fishermen, scaring off anybody who comes to this dock. And here he is sitting there. He's sitting there clothed and in his right mind. He's sitting here and he's having a conversation most likely with Jesus and the disciples. He's talking regular. No longer does he act like the crazy wild man that they've seen among these tombs, but he's a regular guy. He's sitting here clothed, no longer crying out, no longer cutting himself, no longer running around, and it scares them. Notice, they were afraid. They were scared of this. Why? Not because they're scared of the man. They're scared of what has happened to this man. What has Jesus done that's made this man change so completely, so drastically, that now this man is acting calm and cool and collected. And so they're afraid. And then the herdsmen begin to tell them about what had happened. And you notice those who had seen it, the herdsmen, the disciples, anybody else who was around, they begin to tell them about Jesus and his interaction with this man, about how this man told him about the legion that was within him, and how Jesus had cast them out and cast them into the pigs. And then after they fear everything that's happening, the people have to make their decision. And that's what we see last. And this is going to be as far as we get, verse 20. It says, and they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. As they were getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. And he did not permit him, but said to him, go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you. And he went away and began to preach in the Decapolis about how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. So notice what it says here. The people hear what Jesus has done. They come to talk to him. They see what Jesus has accomplished. And when they see this man, they're afraid. They're worried. They're put off. And they beg Jesus to go. Now, this is very interesting. When we see Jesus when we see these other accounts of Jesus healing people, casting out demons, doing all these mighty works, everybody begs him to stay. Everybody begs him, stay with us. Let us bring more people to you. Well, let's get you more people. But these people are so shocked, so afraid of what Jesus has done, that they tell him, leave. We want you to go from here. And we see Jesus getting into the boat. Now, this sometimes makes us question and say, well, why did Jesus give in to this request? And we see two requests here. We see the people request Jesus to leave, and the man makes a request to go with Jesus. One request is granted, and one request is denied. You would think that of what we would do if we were in this situation, we'd probably deny the fact of Jesus of leaving, that we would allow the guy to go with us. We would take the guy with us to explain and tell about what happened, and we would leave the people who said no. We would just go on anyway. But Jesus doesn't go. Why? Jesus doesn't go where he's not invited. Jesus does not stay where he's not welcome. Why? Because he wants people to hear him. He knew his time was short. He knew his time was limited. He knew his time was very precious. And therefore, he only went where people wanted him to be. And that's the same we see today. Jesus is only with us. Jesus only saves. Jesus only looks after those who are willing to come to him. Those who are willing to accept him and follow him and obey him. But notice the second request. Second request was, as he's getting in the boat, this man who has had these demons begged Jesus to let him go with him. And you may ask and wonder, well, why did this man beg Jesus? You would think if this man had been sick and since he'd been demon possessed, he'd been out of his mind, been away from his family and his friends, he would have wanted to go back. He would have wanted to go back and see his old friends. But you got to remember this. Everybody knew this man as being wild, knew this man as being crazy, knew this man as being demon possessed. This man was having to live up to an image that he didn't want to have to deal with. he probably would have been branded as this wild man for the rest of his life. And people were amazed at how much he changed. And so some people think that this may be why he begged Jesus to let him go, because one, Jesus cared for him, had compassion, and healed him. But two, because he didn't want to deal with the consequences. He didn't want, not necessarily the consequences, he didn't want to deal with the repercussions of what had happened to him. And I don't say consequences because he didn't do anything, what we know of, to cause his demon possession, but it just happened to him. And so he was not wanting to have to do all this again, probably. And we get this very interesting request because sometimes we'll see men come to Jesus and beg him to come with him, and he'll let him go. Remember, we just talked about earlier, Mark, that he called the fishermen and said, come with me. He told other people, come, follow me, be my follower. This guy begs to be his follower, and Jesus says, no, you got to stay here. Well, why? Well, I think he stays here for a very important reason. Notice verse 19. And he did not permit him, but said to him, go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. Jesus says, this is what I want you to do. I want you to stay here. And I want you to tell everybody what's happened to you. When people see you, they're going to wonder, they're going to question, well, what happened to that demon-possessed man? If the demon-possessed man had went with Jesus and had not come back here for a while, people would think that Jesus had done something, taught him or changed him some way that way. But Jesus wants him to realize, he wants him to go and tell everybody that it was an immediate, sudden change of what Jesus has done. He says, you go to your friends. You go tell everybody what's happened to you. Go tell them how you're possessed by these demons and what God has done and how God has taken care of you, how God has healed you, how God has had mercy on you. Not that he deserved mercy, not that he deserved this healing, but Jesus gave it to him freely. And then he knows verse 20. And he went away, and he, the demon-possessed man, began to proclaim in Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. He went away and he began to preach. He began to teach. He began to tell people about Jesus. And what's interesting about this is that word Decapolis is a little deceiving to us because we would hear that and it almost sounds to us like Decapolis is a city, one city, one area. But Decapolis is more than that. You see, Decapolis is a compound word. The deca, if you have a decahedron, like you learn about in school, or deca is 10. In Greek, polis, P-O-L-I-S, is city. You see, Decapolis was not one city. Decapolis was an area of Galilee that was 10 cities combined. 10 major cities that were together. Again, they're not the hugest of cities, but they're 10 pretty big cities. And this demon-possessed man, he goes and he proclaims what Jesus has done in Decapolis. He travels these 10 cities and he preaches. He teaches about what Jesus has done because everybody in this area knew him. Everybody around it. And what this tells us, this is about like the idea, again, you take the idea of the guy I told you, if you have a guy at Fulton that does this, the idea is that everybody around you would know. He was such a well-known guy that not only was he at there, but he was somebody that everybody most people coming in contact with or heard about. That people from Tupelo and Amory and Hamilton and Ewan and Winfield, even up to Boonville in our area would have heard about him. And that's the area that we're talking about, a pretty big area with some pretty significant towns in it. That this guy goes and he goes and tells everybody, hey, you know the guy that was down at the ocean, at the sea? You know the guy that lived among the tombs that cut himself? That's me. That's me. And I wonder what that must have been like, his teaching. I wonder if he showed the scars where he had cut himself with the rocks and cut himself with pottery. And he may have said, look, this is where this is the marks I had. Or maybe he had marks on his hands where he broke the chains of that pressure. If he was bound with cuffs and the cuffs digging into his skin and left scars. Imagine what that would have been like. He said, look, I was that guy. I was the very one that was demon-possessed everybody was afraid of. I was down there at the sea. But Jesus came. And Jesus healed me. He cast those demons out. He put me back where I needed to be. And then he knows the last part. Everyone marveled at him. Everyone marveled at what Jesus had done. They were amazed. And what's interesting about this is we look at the timeline of the Gospels. Jesus will come back to this area a little later on. If I remember to point this out, I'll do my best to point this out to you. But when Jesus comes back to Decapolis, and he comes back to this very same area where people asked him to leave, they're going to come to him by the multitudes. The crowds are going to gather around him. Why? Well, a lot of people think for two reasons. One or two reasons. And one for sure, maybe possibly two. One is everybody knows what this demon-possessed man is saying. Everybody knows what happened to this man, what Jesus has done, how Jesus healed him, Jesus took care of him. And they know the reaction. And two, word has gotten out about what happened. Word has gotten out about this man who cast out this many demon-possessed person, this many demon-possessed man, and sent him into the pigs and saved this man when no one else thought they could. And so this is where this encounter ends. What we see here in Mark is in chapter 4, the end of chapter 4, we see Jesus as a power, as a control and authority over nature. In this section, we see Jesus as an authority over the spiritual powers, over Satan, over the spiritual realm, these demons. The rest of this chapter, starting in verse 21, we're going to see two more miracles that Jesus is going to do, and they're both going to be healings. We're going to see Jesus' power over the health, the physical well-being of people, and lastly, we're going to see Jesus' power over death, how he handles death. But that's next Monday night. Next Monday night, we're going to look at the last part of Mark chapter 5. But for tonight, we're going to stop right here. And I want you to get this out of this lesson. And I've been trying to do this more with y'all of telling you what you can learn about it. I want you to realize that what Mark writes to us and what Mark tells us is Mark is revealing to us that we can know who Jesus is. Just as the demon said that he was the Son of God, we can know he's the Son of God. That's why Mark wrote the book. Mark wrote this book so we can know who Jesus is, that we can believe in him, we can follow him, we can obey him. And we can know that just as he saved that demon-possessed man, just as he had mercy on that man that was possessed by these many demons, he can have mercy on us. He can forgive us and save us if we'll come to him. And then we're called to do just like this demon-possessed man does. We're called to tell other people. Now, we may not be like the man. We may not have a great story of how bad our life was before Christ. We still have a story to tell. We still have a story that we reveal what Christ has done for us, how Christ has saved us, how Christ has given us what no one else could. And it's our job to tell others about it, to let them know what we have because of God and what we have because of Christ. Appreciate y'all being here tonight. Appreciate those who are here live. Appreciate those who are watching this later. Hope that you're all having a good week at school and other places. Hope that everything's going well. Next week, we'll see you back here at 7:30. But until then, again, we hope everything's going good, and we will talk to you then.